So in our previous parts, we discussed how sacrificing children to the others has always been part of the Night's Watch's way of life. We see this from the Night's Watch's condonement of Craster, going back to the Night's King, and the foundation of the wall. A black gate beneath a well was built into the wall at its founding, and numerous stories of sacrifice have come from this over the years. And because the black gate was put into the wall from the start, we can surmise that it was part of the original peace agreement between the humans south of the wall and the others north of the wall. The others, it seems, wanted a stream of babies to replenish their ranks, and since at least some of the others are telepaths with the ability to animate the dead, it's probable that the others wanted babies with telepathic abilities. And in fact, it seems that babies with telepathic abilities have been delivered. Assuming the attack at the Fist of the First Men was done by an other, telepaths are in the others' ranks. Now, related to this delivering of telepaths to the others, after marrying warg, skin changers, and greenseers into their families, it seems the Starks too were telepaths, and they were producing excess bastards through a practice called the Lord's Right to the First Night. And so it seems quite logical that it was the Starks providing the telepathic bastard babies for the Black Gate, babies produced from the Lord's Right to the First Night, all as payment to the others. Essentially, the telepaths south of the wall were providing the telepathic babies for the telepaths north of the wall. And so it seems quite likely that this was the very nature of the peace agreement. There would be peace between the men south of the wall and the others north of the wall in exchange for a consistent way for the others to replenish their ranks with telepathic children. The others would no longer have to steal babies and attack the men south of the wall, as long as the men south of the wall provided offerings. A blood sacrifice, if you will. It's all actually quite similar to the Dothraki's relationship with the Free Cities. A periodic tribute is paid, all in the avoidance of war. And of course, this is the agreement that Craster himself has with the others. Offerings for peace, an arrangement condoned by the Night's Watch. And an agreement between mankind and the others would explain much about northern history and customs. This is the reason why the Lord's Right to the First Night endured. It was not just a way for lords to abuse their vassals, but for the sake of a peace agreement. And this would explain why there must always be a Stark in Winterfell, and why women have always been passed over in favor of males to rule House Stark. There needed to be a practicer of the Lord's Right to the First Night for the peace agreement to work. And this would explain why the Andals were treated with such hostility at the Night Fort by King Sherritt and the Rat Cook. Untalented Andal offspring were not part of the peace agreement. It's all very tidy. Perhaps too tidy. And I will say, there does seem to be more to it. So in our last part, we discussed the very nature of skin changing. It's most likely an X chromosome-linked gene, though it's also possible that it's a non-sex-linked recessive gene. Two things are for certain, though. It's definitely not a Y chromosome-linked gene, as there are female skin changers, and it's definitely not a dominant gene, as none of Varamir Six-Skin's children were skin changers. And that's a very serious issue. If the others were in fact receiving telepaths as sacrifices, the Starks alone could not explain it. A single recessive gene would leave the sacrifices a recessive gene shy of functional telepathy, and an X chromosome-linked gene couldn't be passed from a father to a son. Now, perhaps this was all intentional, a trick on the others to ensure that they never actually receive a telepath. Except we do see others with telepathic abilities. There's the incident with Waymar Royce, and the incident at the Fist of the First Men. So these others with telepathic abilities must have gotten their talent from somewhere, and thus the only explanation is that genes were provided from the mothers. And this is true whether it be a sex-linked X chromosome gene, or a second non-sex-linked recessive gene. The mother's role is vital. But this turns everything on its head. We've been paying attention to House Stark and House Blackwood, which are patrilineally based. And we've been seeking the identity of the Night's King and Craster's father. But the more important question may be, who are the women? What of the vassal women that the Lord's Right to the First Night was carried out on? What of the Night's King's queen? What of Craster's mother? What of Dany Flint? Well, let's try to answer these questions. It should be noted that the legends of skin changers hail from the north and beyond the Wall, the lands today that we associate with the First Men, and the First Women. The Starks were actually foreign invaders who conquered the Warg King and the skin changer Gavin Greywolf. This means that other First Men and women besides Starks would also have the skin-changing gene, We've already discussed House Blackwood of the Wolfswood, but let's remember that the Night's King's ethnicity was also debated to be Bolton, Umber, Flint, Nori, Woodfoot, and Skagosi. That is, Northern Northerners, essentially the area close to the Wall, the same peoples who practiced the Lord's right to the First Night. And we have the area north of the Wall, where skin-changer wildlings like Varamir Sixskins are from. And thus widely, this is the area we suspect special skin-changing genes are most prevalent. But the women of our story actually come from an area that's much more specific. We should note that the Night's King's queen was glimpsed from atop the Wall. We're not sure if that's north or south, but it's within 33 miles in either direction. That's how far you can see from 700 feet up. And we should note that Queen Alysanne took lands from the Umbers and the Mountain Clans after staying at Queen's Crown Tower, which is about 90 miles south of the Wall. And Craster's mother was from White Tree Village, which according to the map is very close to the Wall. It looks to be only about 30 miles. And so it seems that the women that would be producing sacrifices for the others all originate from the same general area. And this is where it gets very interesting. On 2 different occasions, once with Bran in A Storm of Swords and once with Jon in A Dance with Dragons, we are told of Ned Stark's matrilineal lineage. That is, we're told of Ned's mother's mother. Ned's grandmother was a Flint, and this is significant as if one assumes the skin-changing gene is an X-linked gene, Ned would have not gotten his gene from his father, Rickard Stark. No, he would have gotten it from his mother, Lyanna Stark, who would have either gotten it from her father, who would have gotten it from his mother, Laura Royce, which seems unlikely as she's from the Vale and we have no stories of the Royces being telepathically talented, or Lyanna Stark would have gotten her special gene from her mother, Arya Flint. And so assuming an X-linked gene, the Starks aren't really talented because they're Starks. They're talented because they're Flints. And it was the Flints whose lands were taken by Alysanne. The Flints and the Norries do appear to be the closest mountain clans to the Wall, and they are famous practicers of the Lord's right to the First Night. Not to mention the fact that the Flints are completely fine with human sacrifice, and it's the Flints who are the closest to where the Night's King stole his bride, and they're the closest to the Black Gate itself. And it's the Flints who are the closest to White Tree Village, Craster's mother's village, on the other side of the Wall. And the Night's King himself was suspected to be a Flint, not to mention we have the story of Dany Flint linked to the Night Fort. Bran actually thinks about his Flint genetics as he passes through Flint lands on his way to Queen's Crown Tower. Old Nan suspects that he inherited his ability to climb from them. Or perhaps he inherited some other abilities from them. Related to all of this talk of Flints and special genes, our author actually spends a great deal of time in the Jaime chapter of A Dance with Dragons establishing a backstory to a particular family rivalry, the Blackwoods versus the Brackens. We hear of 2 women, Bittersteel's mother, Barbara Bracken, and her massive breasts, and the mother of Bloodraven, Missy Blackwood, who was flat as a boy. Of course, this flat as a boy woman must have passed on special genes to her Greenseer son, Bloodraven. Now, quite overtly in the next chapter, Jon 10, our author makes a parallel with the Flints and the Norries who bring wet nurses to the Wall. The Norrie woman has massive breasts, and the Flint girl is flat-chested as a boy. It's very clearly Bracken and Blackwood again, just a chapter later. And it's in this same chapter that Jon reminds us of Ned's matrilineal heritage. That is, his Flint heritage. And so we have a rather direct comparison of Flint to Blackwood, a house with special genes, and a discussion of heritage. And the comparisons don't really stop there. In Jon 11, Jon actually discusses the practice of hostage-taking with the Flint and the Norrie. The blood price, so it's called. Tormund then tries to pass off 2 girls as boys in this hostage exchange. The girls are caught, and Tormund wonders why girls are not eligible as offerings. Jon then brings up the story of Dany Flint, a girl who dressed up like a boy. And so we have a couple of examples of Flints being boy-like, Dany Flint and the Flint wet nurse, who is compared to the boy-like Missy Blackwood. And we should note that Ned's mother's mother, the Flint, is named Arya, a telepathically talented boy-like girl who takes after her father's side of the family. And we have the Flints being directly compared to a house with special genes, as well as being the closest house to the area of Craster's mother, the Night's King's bride, Queen's Crown Tower, and the Black Gate. We are twice reminded of the Stark genetic connection to the Flints, and we even have Bran specifically thinking about inheriting traits from the Flints on his way to Queen's Crown Tower and the Black Gate. Not to mention, assuming an X-linked gene, the family tree works out, and the Flints still practice the Lord's right to the First Night, and are completely fine with human sacrifice. And so it seems that sacrifice to the others is not really about the Stark men so much, but the Flint women. The Night's King was perhaps not as important as the Night's King's queen, a woman found near Flint lands. And the secret of Craster's keep may have less to do with Craster and Bloodraven, but Craster's mother, a woman found near Flint lands. And the specialness of the Stark children may have less to do with their Stark heritage as their Flint heritage. And their Went heritage. And so it seems that it was Flint women who were providing their special genes to the others, though perhaps some people involved think it's from the men, as telepathy manifests in men more often, as with hemophilia. But still, we are left with one big lingering question, and it is the question that Tormund poses as he tries to sacrifice girls to Jon.
A hostage is a hostage, seems to me. That sharp sword of yours can snick a girl's head off as easy as a boy's. A father loves his daughters too. Well, most fathers.
Did Mance ever sing of brave Danny Flint?
Not as I recall. Who was he?
A girl who dressed up like a boy to take the black. Her song is sad and pretty. What happened to her wasn't. Of course, Jon doesn't really answer Tormund's question. Why are women forbidden from the Night's Watch? And why are women poorer hostages than men? Jon's reply only details the punishment to Danny Flint for her transgression. It doesn't really explain why females were excluded in the first place. Jon implies that it's to protect the women from the men, but that's really a poor excuse as almost any environment contains men. And women being excluded from things seems to be a running theme of our story. No women in the Kingsguard, no women in the Citadel, no women ruling Winterfell, no women ruling Westeros, no women in the Night's Watch. And then characters like Brienne of Tarth, Sorella Sand, Sansa Stark, Dany Targaryen, and Danny Flint come along. So why can't women be in the Night's Watch? Why can't they be hostages? Why can't they be offerings? Why can't they be others? Well, the answer may be as simple as no one wants the others breeding. But it seems the others could easily steal any baby female out there. So it's certainly not that. And it wouldn't explain why Danny Flint of the first Flints was specifically targeted as inappropriate. Now, the offerings to the others are a sex-based exclusion, so perhaps we should be looking for a sex-based cause. And this brings us back to our discussion of sex-linked genes. Last time we talked about how Bran may be more powerful because he has Klinefelter syndrome. That is, assuming an X-linked gene, he may have two X-linked genes. Of course, this syndrome is an anomaly, happening relatively infrequently. Women have two X's regularly, and so it may be that when a woman has two special X-chromosome-linked skin-changing genes, she has even more telepathic power. And beyond this, there is even a chance, 1 in 1,000, that a woman would be born with 3 X's, a meta-female. Risking handing over that much telepathic power to the others may have just been too much. And again, there is a certain gender-based irony to all of this that would fit George R.R. Martin's writing. Women are not being excluded because they're weaker or less talented than men. Women are being excluded because they are potentially stronger and more talented than men. We can look to the story of Rhaenyra, whose life coincided with an explosion in the number of dragons in the world, and we can see how fiercely people fought to prevent her from being queen. George R. Martin chose to publish this story in an anthology called Dangerous Women. Keeping women like Danny Flint from the Night's Watch may have been more about keeping a telepathic female from the Black Gate and being an offering to the others. Like Rhaenyra, Danny Flint may have been too powerful. And so as we approach the conclusion of the series, there is still a great deal of uncertainty on events, and quite a few maybes on what's really going on behind the scenes. But here is what I think is the probable situation. I believe that fundamentally various powers like skin changing, being a green seer, face changing, dragon riding, and the other's ability to animate the dead are all a unified telepathic ability, and that this ability is genetic in nature. The special families in our story like Stark, Blackwood, and Targaryen really prove the genetic nature, and the varying abilities of the Stark children show the flexibility of the gene. Although not an essential point, I suspect that one's sex is a significant aspect to the genetic nature of telepathy and how that gene is passed on. My suspicion is mainly based on sacrifices to the others being male, although female exclusion from various institutions is part of this as well. Again, although not essential, I suspect that telepathy is an X-chromosome-linked gene, but telepathy may simply be recessive or involve many genes. I believe that there was a war between telepathic humans and telepathic others, and at its conclusion, there was a peace, and as part of this peace agreement, telepaths south of the Wall were to provide others north of the Wall with telepathic children. The Black Gate, the many stories of sacrifice, and the telepathic nature of the others are all evidence of this. I believe that the Lord's right to the First Night was an essential part of the sacrifice system, creating genetically talented children to give to the others. The fact that practitioners of the Lord's right to the first night align with the Night's King's suspected identity, along with the actions of Queen Alysanne and Roose Bolton's story about wanting to throw his first night baby into a well, are all evidence of this. Whether the telepathic genetic material comes from the Lord Father or the vassal mother is up for debate, but the system itself was essential for the production of sacrifices for the peace agreement. And I believe this is why there's always been a male Stark ruler, and why there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. I believe that various stories about the Night Fort, including the Night's King, the Rat Cook, King Sherritt, and Dany Flint, were perceived disruptions to the peace agreement in some way, whether it be too many genetically talented babies being handed over to the others or too few, or the handing over of a female. Whether or not these were actually disruptions is unknown, but I believe they were perceived disruptions and thus violence ensued. I believe that Queen Alysanne stumbled upon the system of sacrificing children and sought to put an end to it by creating the new gift, ending the Lord's right to the first night, and shutting down the Night Fort and its Black Gate. This is evidenced by the fact that these actions were done together, as well as the northern reaction to the Alysanne reforms. And I believe that the secret of Craster's Keep was that it was a clandestine way to circumvent the Alysanne reforms and re-establish the peace agreement between the humans south of the Wall and the others north of the Wall. I believe that the Night's Watch either tolerated Craster because they either wanted peace, or were happy about him giving inbred babies to the others to destroy their ranks. Now, believe it or not, the Night's Watch series is building towards something that connects everything we've talked about. The election, the half-hand, Craster's Keep. Next time we're going to talk about Jon's story in A Dance with Dragons and what led up to his stabbing. This series will be called Daggers for Jon. And then our final Night's Watch series will be a Grand Picture series, and this one will be titled The War of the Raven. So keep your eyes peeled for those. Once again, I'm probably wrong about half of this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.